It is day 282 of the second Trump administration, and today we now have dozens of states taking the administration to court for refusing to fund food stamps for the next month. Funding for SNAP benefits is set to run out on Saturday, 3 days from now, because of the shutdown. Of course, the Trump administration could use emergency money to keep it going. Today, on a call with his caucus, Speaker Mike Johnson made it clear that he has no plans for a standalone bill that would fund SNAP. That is according to Politico. Johnson encouraged Republicans to stay unified as more Americans are feeling the real pain from the shutdown.
Have fallen completely flat. They think that by not voting on this stuff, it will continue to put more pressure on Democrats to fold, to reopen the government. And so it looks like this stalemate's going to go on for at least a little bit longer, and with no relief in sight for federal workers, for troop pay, unless the administration does something of moving money around, and SNAP benefits, which Democrats insist is actually required by law for the administration to pay SNAP benefits, even if the government is shut down. But the administration is refusing to do so. Steph.
Okay, so picture this. The president of the United States is on a diplomatic tour in Asia, high-stakes meetings, international photo ops. The kind of trip where every word matters because the whole world is watching. And then Trump opens True Social and posts 2 words, South Care, do bet, not South Korea, not South Carolina, South Care, do bet, with 4 Ds at the end. And before anyone can even process what just happened, the post is deleted. But the internet never forgets. Screenshots were everywhere within minutes. Memes flooded social media. And suddenly Trump's entire Asia trip is overshadowed by 2 gibberish words that nobody can explain. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust headlines anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
I mean,
Clearly, I'm tongue-tied. I can't even get my head around it.
Yeah, I guess they need to pretend like they have something to do. I don't know, we're going to investigate the audit, but it's obviously crazy on its face. And it's worth noting that one of the reasons that the House is not back in session, besides the fact that they want, that they don't want to negotiate on SNAP or on Obamacare subsidies, is the fact that if Mike Johnson has to seat the Democrat from Arizona that won the special election, then there would be enough votes in the House to actually release the Epstein files. So the Epstein files cover-up is part of, why they don't have the House in session, and obviously this stupid AutoPen investigation is just a distraction from that. One other thing, if you'll indulge me, I like when I get a chance to put on my former Republican free market hat about J.D. Vance's fight on the Hill. It is pretty crazy that these guys are so responsive to the ranchers' protectionist concerns about their beef, and that's the one thing that Republican senators are complaining about. I mean, I don't know, and there are a lot of Republican voters who eat beef.
This happened October 29th, 2025, and the reaction was immediate and brutal. Over 70% of Americans responded negatively according to a YouGov poll. That's not just Democrats, that's independents. That's even some Republicans looking at this and thinking, what is going on here? Because this isn't a normal typo. This isn't autocorrect failing. This is the kind of mistake that makes people question whether someone is okay, whether they're paying attention, whether they're mentally sharp enough to handle the pressures of the presidency. And those questions aren't coming from fringe critics anymore. They're coming from inside Trump's own party. The Lincoln Project jumped on this immediately. These are former Republicans who've made it their mission to take down Trump. They shared the screenshot. They questioned his mental health. They referenced MRI tests and cognitive decline. They basically took Trump's weird post and turned it into a multi-day news cycle about whether the president is fit for office. And the California governor's office circulated the screenshot too. So now you've got Democratic officials using Trump's own words against him to argue he's unfit to lead. And Trump's team has no good response because how do you explain South Care, D? You can't. There's no spin that makes that look normal. But here's where it gets really interesting. Republicans aren't defending Trump on this. They're either staying silent or they're joining the pile on. 4 Senate Republicans just voted to rebuke Trump on his tariff policies against Canada. Ted Cruz and Rand Paul are publicly criticizing Trump's attacks on media and his speech errors. House Republican leaders are expressing worry about government overreach and what Trump's behavior is doing to the party's reputation. This isn't the usual partisan defense where Republicans circle the wagons no matter what Trump does. This is Republicans breaking ranks. This is the party starting to fracture in public, and you can feel the frustration building. Republicans are watching Trump make unforced error after unforced error. They're watching him dominate news cycles for all the wrong reasons. They're watching potential voters question his competence. And they're realizing that defending this stuff is political suicide. Because how do you go back to your district and explain why you're supporting a president who posts incomprehensible gibberish on social media during diplomatic trips? How do you tell voters that everything's fine when their own eyes tell them something is very wrong? The timing of this couldn't be worse for Trump. We're heading into critical congressional votes. The 2026 midterms are on the horizon. Trump needs party unity. He needs Republicans marching in lockstep, supporting his agenda. Instead, he's got senators rebuking him on tariffs. He's got prominent Republicans questioning his judgment. He's got party leaders distancing themselves from his rhetoric. And all of this is happening because Trump couldn't spell a country's name correctly on social media. Come on, this is wild. This is the kind of self-inflicted wound that can derail an entire political operation. And it's not like this is Trump's first communication disaster. He's been making verbal gaffes and posting weird things for years. But something shifted with South Carolina. Maybe it's because the mistake was so obviously bizarre. Maybe it's because Republicans are finally fed up. Maybe it's because the political stakes are higher now than they've ever been. But whatever the reason, this moment feels different. This feels like the beginning of a real break between Trump and significant portions of his own party. So what's really happening here? Is Trump actually experiencing cognitive decline? Are Republicans finally willing to admit that their standard bearer is a liability? And what does this mean for the Republican Party going forward if they can't count on their leader to get through a single day without creating a massive controversy? Let's dig into this unfolding disaster. All right, so let's talk about what South Carolina actually reveals, because this isn't just about a typo, this is about a pattern. Trump has been making more and more verbal mistakes, more speech errors, more confusing statements, more moments where people listening have to pause and wonder what he meant to say, and his supporters always explain it away. They say he's just speaking off the cuff. They say he's not a polished politician. They say the media takes everything out of context. But South Carolina is different because there's no context that makes it make sense. There's no interpretation where those letters form a coherent thought. It's just wrong in a way that suggests something deeper is going on. The YouGov poll is particularly damaging. 70% of Americans reacting negatively means this isn't a partisan issue. Democrats were always going to criticize Trump, but independents looking at this and having negative reactions, that's a problem, because those are the voters Trump needs to win elections. Those are the people who decide close races. And if they're looking at Trump and questioning his mental fitness, that's a narrative that can sink a campaign. Because once voters start wondering if a candidate is cognitively declining, every future mistake reinforces that perception. Every stumble becomes evidence. Every verbal slip becomes proof. And the Lincoln Project knows exactly how to exploit this. They're former Republicans who understand how Republican voters think. They know what messages resonate. They know what makes people uncomfortable. And questioning Trump's mental acuity hits a nerve because it's the same attack Republicans used against Biden. Republicans spent years saying Biden was too old, too confused, too mentally diminished to be president. They made entire campaigns around his verbal gaffes and senior moments. And now the Lincoln Project is turning that same playbook on Trump. They're showing Trump's mistakes and asking the same questions. Is he fit to serve? Does he have the mental sharpness required for this job? And Republicans can't cry foul because they established this as a legitimate line of criticism. The California governor's office circulating the screenshot is strategic too. Democratic officials aren't just mocking Trump privately, they're using his mistakes in official communications. They're making sure voters see this stuff. They're building a case that Trump is unfit for office, using his own words and actions as evidence. And that's politically devastating because there's no defense. Trump can't claim the screenshot is fake. He can't say it's taken out of context. He posted those exact words. He deleted them because even he knew it looked bad. And now those words are being used against him in ways his team can't counter. But the real story here is what's happening inside the Republican Party. Because the South Carolina incident is just a catalyst. The underlying issue is that Republicans are fed up. They're tired of defending Trump's chaos. They're tired of explaining away his mistakes. They're tired of watching him dominate news cycles for embarrassing reasons instead of policy achievements. And that frustration is boiling over into public rebukes that would have been unthinkable a year ago. 4 Republican senators voting to curb Trump's tariff authority is huge. These aren't fringe moderate. These are senators who usually support Trump. But they looked at his trade war with Canada and said this is too much. We can't let him keep escalating conflicts with allies over nonsense. We have to push back. And they did. They joined Democrats to rebuke Trump's tariff policies. That's a bipartisan rejection of Trump's approach. That's Republicans saying out loud that their own president is screwing up and needs to be restrained. Ted Cruz and Rand Paul speaking out is significant too. Cruz was one of Trump's most reliable defenders. He swallowed his pride after Trump insulted his wife and his father during the 2016 campaign. He became a loyal Trump supporter because he thought it was politically necessary. But now Cruz is publicly criticizing Trump's attacks on media and his communication failures. Cruz is worried about government overreach and what Trump's behavior means for the party. And if Cruz is breaking ranks, that tells you how bad things have got, because Cruz doesn't do anything unless he thinks it's politically safe or necessary. And apparently criticizing Trump now falls into one of those categories. Rand Paul has always been more willing to buck Trump on civil liberties issues, but even Paul's criticism feels sharper now. He's not just disagreeing on policy, he's questioning Trump's judgment. He's expressing concern about where Trump is leading the party. And when libertarian-leaning Republicans like Paul are sounding alarms, it suggests the concerns go beyond typical policy disagreements. This is about fundamental questions of competence and leadership. House Republicans are in a similar bind. They need Trump's base to win elections, but they also need to distance themselves from Trump's disasters to appeal to swing voters. And that's an impossible balance. You can't be simultaneously all in on Trump and also critical of his obvious mistakes. Voters see through that kind of political hedging. So House Republicans are stuck trying to thread a needle that probably can't be threaded. Support Trump enough to avoid primary challenges, but criticize him enough to avoid general election backlash. Good luck with that. The frustration within the party goes beyond this one incident. Republicans are dealing with Trump's entire communication strategy. He posts impulsively. He picks fights unnecessarily. He makes inflammatory statements that create problems for down-ballot candidates. He can't stay on message for more than a few hours before going off script and generating new controversies. And party strategists are tearing their hair out because they can't plan around this kind of chaos. You can't build a coherent campaign when your standard bearer is constantly stepping on your message with bizarre social media posts. And Trump's age is becoming an unavoidable issue. He's 79 years old. That makes him one of the oldest presidents in history, and voters are noticing. The same voters who worried about Biden's age are now applying that same scrutiny to Trump. And Trump's verbal mistakes and weird posts give ammunition to people who want to argue he's too old for the job. Republicans can't dismiss age concerns anymore because they made age a central issue in previous campaigns. They set the standard that cognitive fitness matters. And now Trump has to meet that standard. And based on incidents like South Carolina, it's not clear he can. The media coverage of this has been relentless. Every major outlet ran stories about the post. Cable news spent hours analyzing what it might mean. Late-night comedians had a field day, and all of that coverage reinforces the narrative that something is wrong, that Trump is declining, that he's not up to the job anymore. And once that narrative takes hold, it's incredibly difficult to reverse because every future mistake gets interpreted through that lens. Confirmation bias kicks in. People see what they expect to see, and if they expect Trump to make cognitive errors, they'll find them everywhere. Okay, so let's talk about where this goes from here. Because the South Carolina incident isn't going away, it's already being used in campaign materials. Opposition researchers are cataloging every Trump verbal slip. Political operatives are building montages of his mistakes to use in ads. And Republicans have to figure out how to deal with this reality. First, can Trump recover from this kind of public embarrassment? Probably. He survived worse. He's been caught on tape saying terrible things. He's been impeached twice. He's been convicted of crimes. And his base has stuck with him through all of it. But here's the thing. His base isn't enough to win national elections. He needs independents. He needs swing voters. And those voters are more persuadable. They're more likely to look at something like South Carolina and think maybe this guy isn't fit to be president anymore. Second, what do Republicans do about Trump's communication strategy? They can't control him. Nobody can. Trump does what Trump wants. He posts what he wants to post. He says what he wants to say. And his team is left scrambling to clean up the messes. So Republicans have two choices. Either continue defending the indefensible and hope voters don't care, or start publicly breaking with Trump and risk alienating his base. Both options are terrible. Both lead to electoral problems. And that's why you're seeing this internal chaos where different Republicans are making different calculations about how much distance to create. Third, the age issue is now unavoidable. Democrats are going to hammer this. They're going to run ads questioning Trump's mental fitness. They're going to compile every verbal mistake, every confused moment, every bizarre post, and they're going to ask voters if this is really who should have access to nuclear codes. Republicans used that exact playbook against Biden, and now it's being used against Trump. And the terrible irony is that Republicans can't complain about it because they established this as fair game. You can't spend years questioning one candidate's mental acuity and then cry foul when your candidate faces the same scrutiny. Fourth, what about party unity going into 2026? The cracks are showing. Senate Republicans are voting against Trump. High-profile figures are criticizing him publicly. House Republicans are hedging their support. And all of this division creates opportunities for Democrats. because a divided party loses elections. Voters punish parties that can't get their act together. And right now, Republicans look chaotic and leaderless. They look like they don't know whether to embrace Trump or run from him, and that uncertainty is politically deadly. Fifth, does this embolden Trump's primary challengers? If Republicans are openly questioning Trump's fitness, does that create space for someone else to run against him? Probably not in a serious way. Trump still controls the base, but the fact that the question can even be asked shows how much his position has weakened. A year ago, challenging Trump was unthinkable. Now it's at least conceivable that someone could mount a credible primary challenge by arguing Trump is too old, too erratic, too much of a liability. The broader question is whether Trump can change. Can he be more disciplined? Can he stop making unforced errors? Can he focus on policy instead of picking fights and posting gibberish? And the answer, based on decades of evidence, is no. Trump is who he is. He's not going to suddenly become a different person. He's not going to start carefully crafting his messages and thinking before he posts. That's not how he operates. And that means Republicans are stuck with a candidate who will continue generating controversies and damaging the party's brand. The South Carolina duck moment is symbolic of a much larger problem. It represents Trump's inability to stay disciplined, his tendency to create problems where none existed, his refusal to let handlers manage his communication, and most importantly, it gives voters a concrete example of something seeming off. Not a policy disagreement, not a controversial statement that some people like and others hate, just a weird mistake that makes everyone uncomfortable and questioning. Those are the kinds of moments that shift elections, because they stick in people's minds. They become defining images of a candidate, and once voters associate you with incompetence or cognitive decline, it's nearly impossible to change that perception. So what happens next? Well, Trump will keep campaigning. He'll keep posting on Truth Social. He'll keep making speeches and holding rallies. And Republicans will keep holding their breath every time he opens his mouth or touches his phone, hoping he doesn't create another disaster, hoping he can make it through a single day without embarrassing them. But hope isn't a strategy. And based on Trump's track record, more mistakes are inevitable. The only question is whether Republicans will finally reach a breaking point where they're willing to openly oppose him, or whether they'll keep defending the indefensible until it costs them everything. And judging by the aggressive reactions to South Carolina, we might be closer to that breaking point than anyone realized. Next time, we'll look at how Democrats are planning to exploit Trump's verbal mistakes and what Republicans can realistically do to minimize the damage. Because yeah, this is just getting started.